All right, everyone, we are getting ready for our next talk, so please come back to your seats. We have a University of Scranton senior physics major, Rebecca Potter, KE2EBI, has been working very hard at studying the Gannon Storm using personal space weather station data. And she's doing this for her senior undergraduate thesis. So it's going to be a really exciting talk. So everyone, give you another minute to get back to your seats, and then we will hear from Rebecca. All right, everyone, it's with great pleasure I introduce Rebecca Potter, KE2EBI, talking about personal space weather station observations of the Gannon Geomagnetic Storm. Again, this is a work for her senior undergraduate thesis as a physics major at the University of Scranton. Take it away, Rebecca.
Okay, hi everyone. As Dr. Frissell just mentioned, I'm a fourth-year undergraduate physics major at the University. Is this on? Oh, there. Okay, good. Okay, nice. So hi everyone. As Dr. Frissell just mentioned, I'm a fourth-year undergraduate physics major from the University of Scranton, and I'm here to share the project I've been working on, personal space weather stations of the Gannon Geomagnetic Storm. So first, I'd like to thank my co-authors, Frissell, Griffiths, and Pandey. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so first I'll start with a very brief overview of what a geomagnetic storm is. So geomagnetic storms are space weather events that are caused when elevated levels of solar activity disturb the Earth's magnetosphere. The influx of solar energy temporarily changes the composition of the ionosphere, and common effects include satellite drag, navigation system failures, and disruptions to communications. The geomagnetic storm, known as the Gannon Storm, occurred from the 10th to 13th of May in 2024. It was classified as a G5 geomagnetic storm, which corresponds to a KP index of 9. This is the highest level possible on the NOAA scale of geomagnetic storm intensity, and no storm comparable to it has occurred since 2003. The Gannon storm was a notable event to the general public, as well as scientists and space weather enthusiasts, because it caused auroras to appear at abnormally low latitudes. The specific effect of the Gannon storm that I'm focused on in this project is its effects on HF propagation, as well as the personal space weather station's capabilities at detecting the storm. So the goal of the study is to answer the following questions. 1, when did the personal space weather station network begin to detect the Gannon storm, and when did it stop? And 2, what changes occurred in the data in response to the storm? The reasons I want to answer these questions are to get a better understanding of how the ionosphere responds to extreme geomagnetic storms. Another eventual application is to learn how infrastructure that relies on HF frequencies can be better equipped against similar extreme space weather events that will inevitably occur in the future. So as many of you may already be familiar with, the ionosphere has distinct regions that change height, divide, and merge in a regular pattern throughout the day-night cycle. When the height of a region changes, the path length of an HF signal that refracts off that region is lengthened or shortened. This change in path length causes a Doppler shift that can be detected at the signal's receive site. On the right, I have an example of data gathered by HamSCI Personal Space Weather Station. I'll discuss that figure in more detail shortly. So the first step I took in this project was to compile a catalog of all the personal space weather stations that were active during the Gannon storm. Then I narrowed my focus onto one station and one of its receive frequencies to begin analyzing in more detail. The station frequency I selected were W2NAF, owned and operated by Dr. Frissell, and 15 megahertz. So I identified the different phases of the Gannon storm using SimH plots, and then I examined changes in the data throughout each phase of the storm. And this map shows the location of the personal space weather station W2NAF and the two time standard stations is receiving signals from. So W2NAF is located in northeastern Pennsylvania, and the HF signals it receives travel there from WWV in Colorado and CHU in Ontario, Canada. As I briefly mentioned earlier, a SimH plot reveals the phases of a geomagnetic storm. And SimH is a global measure of the enhancement of Earth's magnetosphere from the equator. And so, the moment the geomagnetic storm begins is called sudden storm commencement. This occurred at 1710 UTC on May 10th, and is seen as a small positive spike in SimH. The main phase of the storm occurred from after sudden storm commencement on May 10th to 2:15 on May 11th. This is seen on the plot as a decrease in SimH over several hours. And finally, the recovery phase took place from the end of the main phase at 2:15 on May 11th until the end of May 13th. This is a gradual increase in sim age back to normal levels and can span over multiple days. So this figure that I briefly shared earlier shows Doppler shift versus time. Each of these 4 plots displays a different frequency. Right now we're looking at 5, 14.67, 15, and 20 megahertz. 5, 15, and 20 megahertz are transmitted from WWV, and 14.67 arrives from CHU in Ontario. And this figure on the left is data taken. So the figure on the left is data taken on May 10th, the start date of the Gannon Storm. But to understand what was caused by the Gannon Storm, it's important to know what these plots look like on a geomagnetically quiet day for comparison. The figure on the right is data taken on the same frequencies, but on May 8th, a quiet day 2 days before the Gannon Storm started. The main difference between these 2 dates is the higher Doppler shifts towards the end of the day on May 10th when the Gannon Storm started. So the frequency that I decided to examine in detail first was 15 megahertz. I chose this particular frequency because it propagates throughout the entire 24-hour day, and relatively low Doppler shifts occurred on this frequency during the regular day-night cycle on a quiet day. I also chose this one because I had a very noticeable response to the Gannon Storm in comparison to a few of the other ones. So all of the quiet days in May 2024 have similar data for the same frequencies. But there are small variations among these days that could be due to equipment performance or small-scale solar events. So an average quiet time spectrogram is more representative as a baseline than any individual day. So here I have a plot of the average Doppler shift versus time for a quiet day in May 2024. This was the average all the days with KP of 2. And so this is the same plot as in the previous slide, but zoomed in on the vertical scale. And as you can see, very small Doppler shifts occur throughout a quiet 24-hour period on 15 megahertz. The main feature of this plot is a small sunrise peak from about 9 to 12 UTC, and this only changes the carrier frequency by about 1 hertz or less. So to look at the Doppler shift data numerically by hour, I used a reduced form of the data, which are the 2 plots on the left. The top one shows Doppler shift versus time, and the bottom is signal-to-noise level versus time. And so these plots show data collected on May 10th, the start date of the Gannon Storm. So sudden storm commencement is marked by a dotted red line, and you can see a significant difference in the data before and after that timestamp. Before the storm start, Doppler shifts remained within plus minus 2 hertz, and signal-to-noise level was high, which indicates a strong received signal. After the storm start, Doppler shifts of up to 4 hertz appear, and signal strength rapidly drops. So then, the main phase of the storm continued into the next day and ended around 2:15 UTC on May 11th. And then after this was the start of the recovery phase. So for the first 6 hours of May 11th, Doppler shifts were up to 3.5 hertz. Then a blackout occurred on this frequency for 3 hours. The signal returned at 1200 UTC and was very stable for the rest of May 11th. And now we're looking at May 12th. This station received no 15 megahertz signal for the first half of the day, even though 15 megahertz usually propagates during this time. Signal-to-noise level was below 50 dB for these 12 hours, meaning that any Doppler shift data points from this time period have very low certainty. And the lower frequencies that the same station receives were detected during this same time, and also other stations in the network also witnessed this blackout on 15 megahertz. And which confirms that this blackout had to do with a change in the ionosphere rather than equipment performance. So the recovery phase of the storm continued into May 13th. Here we see that the signal strength was high again for the first 3 hours of the day, but dropped from about 3 to 12 UTC. The signal appeared again at 1200 and continued propagating to W2NAF for the rest of the day. Doppler shift magnitudes resembled quiet time levels, but the signal strength hadn't fully recovered to quiet time levels just yet. And finally, on May 14th, it is generally accepted as the day the Gannon Storm is over. The personal space weather station data supports this conclusion, as Doppler shift and signal-to-noise levels resemble quiet time data for this entire day. There is a brief moment of elevated Doppler shifts around 1800 UTC, but this was due to a solar flare that occurred on that day and not the Gannon Storm. So here are the results in summary. So 15 megahertz propagates from WWV to W2NAF throughout the day on a quiet day with very little frequency variation. And this personal space weather station started detecting the elevated Doppler shifts the moment of sudden storm commencement. Sorry. Yeah, okay. The Doppler shifts received during the main phase of the storm reach up to 4 Hertz compared to the typical quiet time Doppler shifts of about 1 Hertz. And 2 multi-hour blackouts on 15 megahertz occurred during the recovery phase. And signal's noise level dropped below its usual level during the Gannon Storm. And finally, the data returned to typical levels by the end of the recovery phase on May 14th. So one of the research questions I mentioned at the beginning was I wanted to answer when the personal space weather station starts and stops detecting the Gannon storm. Based off the data we've seen, the times the station detected the start and end of the storm agree very well with what simulation plots tell us. So this means that a personal space weather station can be used to examine the duration of an intense geomagnetic storm. But the personal space weather station doesn't show us a clear distinction between the main phase and the recovery phase down to the hour. And another thing this data tells us is that the Gannon storm caused significant ionospheric layer height changes, and that these changes occurred in both directions, as we see both positive and negative Doppler shifts. So future work for this project includes repeating this analysis on the other frequencies besides 15 megahertz, because different frequencies interact with the ionosphere differently. Another way the study might be expanded in the future is looking at the data collected by other personal space weather stations and the network at various other locations. The network is a very expansive source of data beyond what I've discussed here today, so there's plenty more to look at in the future. My references are available on the PowerPoint, and that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was great work. We have time for questions. Yes, Bob Melville.
Hang on. We like to hear you, and Zoom likes to hear you.
On the G scale, G5, where would you put the Carrington event? Or is it difficult to answer that question?
I haven't compared the Gannon storm to the Carrington event, but I believe it was G5.
But I mean, the stories I've heard about the Carrington event, like it set telegraph stations on fire. I didn't see that in the Gannon storm. I'm just, as a kind of maybe a vague question, but you didn't even have the geomagnetic scale in 1859. Is there any anecdotal evidence about that? Or
I think there's more than anecdotal evidence. I think you can find, there's like a whole special issue or number of papers that retrospectively look at the Carrington event. So if you look on scholar.google.com, I think you can find people that have looked at that. I'm guessing it's G5 plus.
Hi, this is more of a question about future. I noticed that you, in the color graphs, you could definitely see when propagations just died out.
Yeah.
But WWV is now sending some data that is interpretable, and it might be useful to track when you can interpret that data and when you can't.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's not something that I've done currently, but yeah, that's something that I can definitely keep in mind as I continue working on the project.
Any more questions? I think maybe to follow on to your question, Ed, we do have people who are looking at techniques for looking at some of the information in the modulated part. Like I know Michael Howen's doing things looking at different sidebands and stuff like that. So I think there are people doing that, starting to do that sort of stuff.